coffee, juice. Happy Halloween. Today is our second workshop in a 6-week workshop series, which is currently ongoing through December. South Dakota Bio, the Zeal Center for Entrepreneurship, and the SHARPHub program, which is a program funded by the National Institutes of Health, have worked to put together this workshop for you. The purpose of this workshop is to help innovators in South Dakota to better understand the pathway to commercialization for translating your research into the marketplace. The target audience for this workshop series is really anybody in South Dakota working with an early stage technology that needs to be commercialized, and there is a focus on life sciences and biomedical technologies for this workshop series. That said, if you are not a researcher, if you're not working with biomed technologies, this is absolutely still the workshop series for you, and we are so happy to have you. My name is Beth Lambeth. I'm the Tech Transfer Officer at the University of South Dakota, and I'm here to represent SHARPHub. South Dakota Bio and the SHARPHub strongly believe that networking and training opportunities really help innovators to accelerate the translation of their biomed technologies into the marketplace. So a big part of this workshop is to meet you and network you with other resources throughout South Dakota who can make that happen for you. A quick spiel about just the rest of the workshop series. So today we've got Harmon from QUIBIT speaking about regulatory pathways. Next week on November 7th, we have Dan James, a retired DuPont executive, speaking with us about creating a value proposition. On November 21st, we have Tony Olson from D2 Consulting, which is located in North Sioux, and he will be speaking with us about intellectual property and the role that that plays in your strategic business plan. On December 5th, we have Gary Archambault from South Dakota SBIR STTR, along with Dan Ingebretson, who is with USD's Biomedical Engineering Department, talking to us about funding for a startup and more specifically, a tech-based startup. And our last workshop is on December 12th. Mark Slade will be speaking with us from the South Dakota Small Business Development Center, all about how to create a business. With that, I will introduce Michelle. She is representing the U.S. Small Business Administration. Unless, Joni, did you want to say anything? I don't want to just like
Well, go ahead, Michelle. When you're done, I'll talk.
Okay, perfect.
I'm from the Small Business Administration, and we're located here in the Zeal building downstairs. And I've passed out our resource guide, and also I passed out our resource network sheet too. So we work with the Small Business Development Center, the SCORE program, our Women's Business Center, and the VBOC. So we just wanted to let you know we're downstairs, we're across the state, we're here to help resources. We've talked about business plans, how to do them, we'll be talking about them. So I just want to let you know we're a resource. If there's something we can do to help you, let us know. So, thank you.
Do you mind if I just quickly have everyone introduce themselves?
Oh, yes,
I
thank
give you
you.
an idea of who's in the audience. And It's a small group today, so it shouldn't take too long. But I also want to say one of the reasons that we started this, thankfully, USD went together with a few other states to write this grant, and were awarded this. But we heard from a lot of our member companies that some of their gaps are we don't know what to do if we start a company, or should we even, I don't think some inventors thought about starting a company because they didn't know what to do. So we're trying to create a pipeline in South Dakota so that when GoEd goes out and recruits companies, we can say, yes, we've got all of this work going on at our universities and at our other research institutions. So it's a good place for you to come and partner with some of these folks. So that's kind of the reason why we're doing some of this. Thank you for being here. I know some of you traveled a fair distance to get here this early morning, so we appreciate you doing that. With that, would you guys mind just saying who you are, maybe who you represent, and a little bit about why you're here, very briefly, so we don't take too much of Erin's time. Sam, you want to start?
Hello, my name is Samantha Nelson. I work for USD in the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. Sponsored programs.
I'm Will. I actually work for MarketBeat, and Joyce didn't stop in, so I'm here.
I'm Bill McGuckin. We're actually opening up a business in Zeal in 2 weeks. It's called Harmon Group. It's executive search with focus on biotech, and looking forward to learning a bit more today.
Jim Newell, Division of Research, Economic Development, South Dakota State University. Here to Program Director for South Dakota.
I'm Yuan. I'm from Dakota State University. I'm a faculty in computer science here. I have a product. I want to commercialize it. That's why I'm here. Yeah.
Aaron Spencer, Director of Innovation Entrepreneurship Program at the Beacon School at USD.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here. With that, we'll kick it off to Aaron, and you can maybe tell a little bit about your background, what your pathway to get to where you're at.
Yep. Yeah, so I've got on here my Nanovate slide deck, and I work for a company called Nanovate. They're downstairs. It's a small medical device company. So this presentation will be kind of using medical devices as examples. But then also, I think Beth and Joni mentioned QUIBIT. QUIBIT is a Quality Assurance Professionals Network that I co-founded a couple years back. And so it's a bunch of people that get together, we're kind of nerds and talk about quality related things. So I've been in the regulated industry for probably about 12 years, 13 years, something like that. So I want to, with this, kind of walk you through some regulatory pathways. But I want to make sure I mention I'm here for you guys, not for me. So you can interrupt me, you can ask questions. I did mention I'll be using medical devices as an example, but philosophically, it's applicable to other industries as well. And yeah, we're small, so we'll make it interactive. I was gonna put my costume on, and it's the Grim Reaper. I've got
So you have a site.
my site, because in quality, that's kind of what you are. So with an Nanovate, my role there is quality assurance and then also project management. So I tell people, my job is to tell people they're wrong, how they're doing their work, and they're not doing it fast enough. So I thought I should dress up like the Grim Reaper today for my team. So first, doesn't sound like many people are trying to bring a product to market right now in like the FDA or USDA regulated space. But if you were, how would that make you feel if someone's like, hey, your great lubricant is going to be regulated pretty heavily, which it actually might be with the automotive industry. But how would that make you feel?
Adequate.
Okay. How about others? If you found out your idea or product was going to be regulated?
Anxious.
Will?
No. Haven't given it any thought.
I've seen a pile of different reactions over the years. I've talked to people and I was like, sounds like what you're doing is going to be regulated. And they're never like, yay, that's really good. Glad to hear that. The follow-up question then is, would you want companies that are making products for you, imagine, or your kids, or someone you love, are going to get a treatment from somebody, would you want them to be regulated? Or would you want them to be able to be free to be a market disruptor that pursues profit?
Regulated, please.
I would probably want them regulated too. So the FDA's, their job is to make sure that when people bring products to market for humans, or even animals, that they are safe and effective for their intended use. Now, when someone is looking at it from, it's my product, and I'm bringing this to market, the perception always is, I know it's good, and I know I've done it right, and this is gonna be a safe and effective product. But I don't think anyone should believe you, and I don't think the FDA should believe you either. So the reason I say that is, first of all, this is medical device recall database. So you can go in, you can just search at how many recalls are happening. So in the med device space, this is from October 10th to October 16th. There's 5 different companies right now that are recalling devices because of something that's not working properly. So if there's 5 different companies within a 1-week window that are recalling devices, that tells you there's a lot of things that aren't going the way they should go. And those are being recalled because they may be questionable to the safety or the effectiveness of that product.
Question, so these products are being used by people, perhaps inside their bodies somewhere, and they're being recalled.
Yeah, I don't know how
That's
it
not
works.
something we need.
If you get a hip implant and it gets recalled, I'm not sure how easily that recall works.
You just return it with your receipt.
Yeah,
like,
right,
come pop out a new one. Yep.
That's a,
One more question with these recalls. Is there a common thread, a common theme of, oh, it's getting, another thing is recalled for the same thing that we always hear valve?
In the medical device space, the smallest reason, the least number of causes is human error. The highest right now is software.
Oh, okay.
And so it's software is like 24 to 40% somewhere in there as it goes.
The good news is the software can be updated without surgery, usually.
Right.
But it's also kill people. And I have a Boeing 737 MAX smug. That was a software glitch. So this is a wellness or energy wellness rifle you can buy from Betty. It's Betty's Super Gen Model 2 on eBay.
Did you say rifle?
It's a wellness rifle, that's what it's called.
Oh, okay.
So you can buy this and it'll electrocute you at some level. And if you go on there, it'll say, you know, this is not an actual treatment, and they try to like put all these little, you know, this is not real, you shouldn't pretend this is real. But yeah, it's got all these nice electrodes and things, because people are still creating things and sticking them out there and trying to make them go. And then lastly, we could ignore Elizabeth Holmes. She keeps growing in popularity. But she has a medical device that she wanted to bring to market, and she was very innovative. She was going to be a disruptor, and it didn't work, but she didn't let on otherwise. So the FDA probably shouldn't be too trustworthy, and there's tons and tons and tons of examples, but I think that these are a few worth picking on.
Has there ever been, all the money at stake, has there ever been any organized interference with release or the research of a product that caused it to be recalled? Where maybe a competitor had people make multiple complaints or somehow interfere with the process?
Never heard of that.
Okay.
So if you were, so you have a device marketed or a drug marketed, you do pharmacovigilance or some kind of, you got some kind of call-in thing, and it's all, when you brush years, that number, that you can call Oral B and lodge a complaint. So when they do that, they have a complaint database, and they will investigate out and try to find cause. And then from there, that's when they start seeing those things pile up in specific areas, then it will queue. So for someone to do it, it is still go through a full investigation on the company side. And if it wasn't true, then it wouldn't show up. But people will do different crazy things.
Yeah.
So, but I haven't heard of a specific case of that. But I know where your brain goes now. So also with interactions with people, I mentioned that the FDA probably should, I put others, be more gentle. But there's some misconceptions out there, I think, about the FDA. And so one that I've heard, and this was quite recently, was our product, we know at the end it's right. So therefore, everything to get there must be right. And a quote that I pulled from a book, which I like, is quality can't be tested into a product, it's the sum total of what constitutes the product. The reason you can't just say the end is right is because you can't test every single pill going out the door. You don't have to, if you do that, you destroy the product. So you're going to have to assume that some of that going out the door is completely safe. And your testing of the product is the verification step. It verifies that it works. And then if you're not in control of your process and you just rely on testing, how do you know that every batch is going to come off? So in the USDA regulated space, they regulate on the product. The FDA regulates on process. So what the FDA says is, if everything you do up to that product is done correctly, your product will be correct. What the USDA has done for a long time, and I believe this has been like a slow change for them, is they've said, if your product is tested and it's right, we'll accept that and release it. It's going into the animal biologics for the most part in that case. The company I worked for had a large volume of scrap. So they were manufacturing and they would have lots that would come off and they wouldn't pass, they couldn't put them in the product, and they would dump it. And then they would do another lot, hopefully that one was high enough that they could blend it and get the product to be right at the end, and then out it go. But we have lots of dollars lost because the process wasn't right. There's too much variability. When you have lots of variability, you don't have a consistent product. So if you're making children's Tylenol and you test 10% of it and say it passes, but only 1% of it has a contaminant in it that's very toxic, and you say, well, I tested it and it was fine, you send it all out the door because your process had variability and allowed 1% of that to have an issue. Now you've potentially killed some people off because of that. So, with the FDA regulatory process, it is every step along the way has to be right. So another one I've heard is the FDA has already approved it, so it's all okay. It's really easy. So first time I heard that, I thought, that worked out well for fen-phen. Because I think most of you guys here probably know about remember the fen-phen deal, where you had two drugs that were on the market, and combined together, they now cause heart problems and 808 mitral valves. And so this is a quote that came out of New York Times. So as they're talking about a physician, the physician says, I figured, gee whiz, these drugs have been on the market for 10 to 12 years. Everything must be known about them. And he never thought about heart problems, obviously, because it hadn't been documented before. And so the FDA looks and says, hey, there's still a risk. We have to evaluate the safety to make sure they're safe and effective. And when you start doing something new with something that's already out there, even though it may be already approved, your new use or new combination could have risks with it, just like fen-phen did. And the FDA did issue a voluntary recall to stop it from being sold because of the problems. Another one that I've heard is it's already published out there, so we know it works. So there's a series of studies done by Amgen, Bayer did it, and then some other individual research groups where they tried to reproduce published articles. So someone who went out, did great research in a lab, got it published in a peer-reviewed journal, it went out there, now it's published and peer-reviewed. And when groups went back to reproduce it, Amgen couldn't reproduce 89% of the studies. Bayer could not reproduce 78% of the studies. These groups were hitting around 50%. They just couldn't reproduce something that's already been published. If you've worked in a lab, you've heard a gazillion stories about people that were like, oh yeah, I had this research project and I couldn't make it work. I had a friend who spent about 1.5 years in his chemistry program up at SDSU trying to reproduce a study from another graduate student. And that graduate student made it work, and he got the right data, and his job, my friend, was to go in and actually pick up from where this guy was at and continue on to the next step. He could not make it work from where that student left off. And it's very normal, and that's common. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll talk about in a few. But just because it's published does not mean it's safe and effective. It just means somebody in a lab was able to make it work. One reason why I have a class I teach about this, and this is like just one small section of it. If you look at equipment and you think about a startup company that's got very little budget, they're often buying very cheap alternative ways to get equipment. And so this is on Amazon. You can go on eBay and buy equipment. It's very common for people to do that. I found equipment in our lab that was last calibrated in 1998 because it came from a lab because they were trying to like grab things and take things cheap and stick them in our lab. And so I confiscated them. But if you look at just equipment alone, A, they could be out of calibration, they might not be maintained correctly, and I can almost guarantee you if you are in a small company that's cash strapped, they don't have a lot of money to pump towards these things because they're trying to do payroll and trying to bring in more materials so they can actually do their studies. They're trying to get trials and studies lined up. You get the wrong time equipment, contamination issues, and things not being used correctly. And so when you look at, if you were to break apart studies, this is just one small fraction of why these groups are failing to be able to reproduce it. Because if you're getting, we weighed out this, et cetera, it can be really misleading and hard to reproduce. So this is over at the University Center. I was teaching a class there. And in the lab was 2 balances. And I had a dry erase marker, and I stuck it on one and took a picture of the weight, and it's 14 grams. Picked it up, stuck it on the other one, and it measured 13.7. Which one of these is right?
Probably neither.
But yeah, we don't know. We have absolutely no way of knowing because these have not been calibrated. There's no sticker on here saying calibrated on this date. You can tell this thing's not been maintained because it's got rust all over it. So you really have no clue what's even happening. If I was a graduate student, when I was a graduate student, if that was in my lab, I would have used that scale or that scale. I wouldn't have ever thought to look at differences between them. I would have measured, I would have done my studies, got my results, and reported out I used 14 grams of this material. And I could be totally wrong. So just because something's published does not mean it's reproducible. So to be a bit practical now and just stop complaining about things. The first step, I think, if you were going to, if I was going to work you through how to figure out are you regulated and what to do about it, it'd be to classify. So if you go to the FDA website.
You know, Aaron, can I just make a quick comment? AOX is a gas supplier here in town, and I've had this discussion with them, and they said one of the reasons that labs should use our gas is because we've taken time to quality control so that it's always the same. Because even if you're utilizing some mixture of gases, those gases have to be correct or they're going to give you false readings when you're done with your experiment. So I mean, it's not even just equipment, it is what you're using in the processing part that can be different than what you think. So anyway,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of ways to mess up lab experiments.
Yeah, there's. Yeah.
So you're talking about publications just aren't necessarily something that you can bank on to have reproducible outcomes and conclusions. Does the FDA or USDA care about publications? I mean, when you say, hey, I've got this cool new thing, is the first thing out of their mouth, well, show me your publications?
So they will allow some of that published data, but it depends on the criticality of it. So a perfect example of this is, I go and purchase from Fisher Scientific some sodium chloride. And sodium chloride comes to the lab, and most Fisher chemicals do not have expiration dates on there. And so I get this bottle, like, there's no expiration date on there. What are we going to do with it? I got to put some kind of date. You have to have expiration date assigned. So with the FDA's guidance, and then that guidance, they say, if there's publications out in peer-reviewed articles that say it has some kind of length based on something, you can assign that to it. However, if that is going to go into your product, you then have to do the study to actually show what that expiration date is, or assign some time period at which it's allowable, and have the data yourself to support it. Because you can't trust someone else's data in that case. But if it was an assay we were using at some point and it wasn't a direct impact on the product, then you can just use published literature.
So you can do a study, go through the cell cultures, the mouse models, you have all this data, you have lots of publications, and then the second you talk to the FDA, you learn you have to literally start from scratch all over again?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, so that's using someone else's stuff that's published.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you do it yourself, you own all that data, and you can now talk about the quality behind that data, and they can come and audit you and look at how you've done that and the quality. So then, yes, you would include that.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't have to be me. As long as you've done it right. If you did it wrong, then you may have to.
But there are always challenges to scaling up also. I mean, the lab environment is different than a production environment.
Yes. Then you get the validation. And that's probably should go out and figure if I was going to put words on here, I'd have validation on here, maybe control on the other side. All right. Yep.
Speaking of validation, do you have a recommended, this is how many times you should be trying this experiment, you should have at least one other colleague redo this experiment for you? I mean, what does validation look like for it to be something that you would consider to be pretty easy to get approved through the regulatory pathways?
Yeah. And I think the best answer to that is it depends.
No.
Okay, I was kind of expecting that, yeah.
Now, saying that it depends is not the whole answer to it. And I'll talk real briefly, but not in this regard. There is standards and guidances out there. So if you take a bioanalytical assay, the FDA has a really nice guidance document. It's about 26 pages, I believe, long, and it spells out you should do this, 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 this. and it's pretty clear. And then you can go to things like USP or ISO and get actual industry standards on how to do that process. And that can give you a lot of those numbers. And then if you don't have that, then you should go get a statistician and start asking that question. So there, as long as you're taking a methodical approach and then also doing it in the context of risk. So if I had a cart in my lab that I use to move things around, I may want to cover under my equipment process. I'm not going to validate the maintenance process on that cart. If I have a machine that does my dose metering on a fill line, then I would. So there's that element of risk as well. Okay, so ways you can figure out, like with the FDA, they will spell out how to know if you're regulated by them. And so step one, if you're moving into a regulated space, is to figure out, are you regulated? And so if your product or product idea, drug device, or food is used on an animal, it is with the FDA. If it is a vaccine for animals, it goes to the USDA. Then if your product or product idea is intended to cure, treat, mitigate, diagnose, or prevent disease in humans, or product, other than food, intended to affect the structure or function of the human body, then it is. If it is a food, including supplements consumed by humans, chewing gum, or a beverage, it is. And then last, if it's a cosmetic, to cleanse or alter the appearance of the body and does not have sun protection factor, this goes to another route. But if it's a cosmetic, then it is as well. And so that's why we have the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
I'd like to reintroduce myself into another area that I was involved in about 25 years ago. And it was a ultraviolet light radiation blood that changes and allegedly cure or treat, so that the product, the way I developed it, would actually bring about some good benefits. And I'm still trying to, right?
Yeah.
I'm still trying to convince someone to test it, why my system is better, and that's what I'm looking for now. The lubricant is my latest, and I've got to confess I'm a mechanical engineer, and mechanical engineers are very much like Marines. Once you're a mechanical engineer, you're always a mechanical engineer. And when my wife was being treated for a disease that she had, I saw a problem, and that's what mechanical and electrical engineers do. Okay, so I'm listening different. Thank you.
And that would be
Right.
regulated.
It's regulated, right?
Yep.
Well, it's on the market already, but it's not working, and I know why.
There's pathways for that. If it's already on the market, that makes it easier.
Well, I was hoping for a grandfather clause on the acceptance of the FDA, that this system is better. I don't even know how well the other one works.
And that goes to my first slide.
Yep.
The FDA won't trust other people. Maybe you.
Right, okay, thank you.
So I do talk a lot about the FDA because that's my world right now. But USDA also does regulations. They get the meats, animal biologics. As soon as you bring animals into something, animal welfare all falls under USDA. And then if you bring pathogens into the US, that is under USDA as well. I used to do a bunch of that, so I got to know a lot about the USDA that way. The EPA does regulations on pesticides and environmental impacts. For a medical device, if it's a class 3 or it's going to a PMA route, you have to do an environmental impact assessment. And then Department of Commerce also gets involved in regulations, and they focus on things like export control. So the company I worked for, we were making large amounts of toxin that was inactivated using the animal vaccine. Being able to make large amounts of toxin is also pretty intriguing to terrorists. And so there's countries that can't have access to our technology how to make lots of amounts of toxin. And so that then falls under this Department of Commerce export controls. So part of what I'm getting at with this is you shouldn't get so laser focused on one agency because there may be other agencies you have to think about as well. And I don't mention OSHA and CDC, they've got some other areas as well they get involved with, so. So once you figure out if you're regulated, then you gotta classify it. For devices, it's pretty easy. You've got class 1, 2, and 3. So a tongue compressor here, this is a nice stainless steel one. This is a class 1 medical device. Class 2 would be something like this. This is a glucose monitor. This is a Da Vinci surgical robot. I was over at Avera and they had a demo out for physicians. And so I walked up and said, I'm a doctor. I just didn't tell them what kind. So they let me play with it for a little while. So that was kind of fun. And then I was out at Walmart last night looking at devices and having fun, and I came across these, and I'm like, I have no idea if these are regulated or not. So it made me think quite a bit about it. I still want to figure it out. And the reason why is this goes on a walker, so a little walker thing, which is kind of impacting how you function as a human. And they go on the bottom, and if we think about this unit, if we added something to it, it would be regulated because it's an accessory to an already marketed device. So that got me thinking, is this considered an accessory? And it may be, but it would be totally in the class 1. So here's the more elegant definition. So the lowest risks are things like a toothbrush. So this is an FDA regulated product. It has to meet certain requirements. Class 2, male condoms are class 2, non-invasive blood pressure monitors. This is where the risk starts to get up. In class 3, if they fail, they're the highest risk. It can cause death. So our device is a class 3, which makes our life a little more challenging as a startup. That's because it's the highest risk. So this is.
So would a lot of the higher risk be therapeutics for like cancer therapeutics? Would that be class 3?
I would think about it from what happens if it fails. So we're a diagnostic test. So if our diagnostic test, we're a breast cancer diagnostic, if it says, no, you don't have cancer, then you walk out the door and say, my test results came back, I don't have cancer. But if you really do, and out you go all happy, and 6 months go by and you're like, man, this pain's not going away, I wonder if it's something else, maybe I should go back to the physician. You've now potentially given that person 6 months of lost treatment, which could kill somebody potentially. So even though we're not a therapeutic, we could still have that kind of impact. So you know you're regulated, and you've classified yourself. Now you have to start figuring out what do you do. And so this is identifying inputs. And there's a slide that will kind of help this make sense coming up. But first, I am a full believer that everyone should dive into the regulations and actually read them and see what they're saying. So I pick on my team. I was in a meeting one time and I said, we're gonna have to have a document retention policy. And I had someone who's pretty opinionated in the group say, yeah, we keep it forever. I said, that's not what the regulations say. He's like, yeah, it does. I'm like, sure now. So go on to ECFR, pull up section 820, go to section 60, I think it is, or 130 in there, pull it up on the screen, I read it out loud in the meeting, and I was like, ha, we have to have, it actually depends on what part we are. So if for R&D we think this thing's gonna be marketed for the rest of eternity, then yeah. But we know it's not gonna be for the rest of eternity. And when we manufacture, we know that manufactured products have a limited shelf life. And so the retention period for the documents is 2 years, or a minimum of 2 years, or the length of that product on the market. And so yes, every disposable cartridge going out the door has a shelf life of like a couple of years most likely. So we should maybe set it at 3 years and done. But you have to know the regulations, because if we don't know that, then we're making up rules arbitrarily as our company, and they might not be right. That's not good. There is, I think, 2,900 guidance documents from the FDA right now, and those walk you through lots of different things. So when you're asking questions like, how much am I going to validate, this is a source to get information on that. There's also standard agencies. There's USP, this is huge for the pharmaceutical space, where they will spell out, if you are doing an assay for vitamin C, here is exactly what it should be. if you are going to qualify an analytical balance for use, is every single step you have to do and the number of things you have to do, it is completely spelled out. You just copy it. As long as you do that, document you've done it, you're fine. ISO standard, I think they've got like thousands, I think in the 40,000s or something for different standards, but they cover into like defense, automotive, the whole breadth. You actually probably find guidance doc, their standards within ISO. I've got a spreadsheet I keep of every regulatory or standard thing I've ever come across. And I'm at 102 right now for different groups that provide inputs. And it depends what you're doing. So this is, the FDA is US, but what if you're going to go launch in Europe and Australia and Canada? And if you're thinking about China, now you've got other regulatory groups to consider as well. And if you don't know what their expectations are and you're gonna try to develop a device, then you could potentially spend a lot of time and money and just be wrong. So I definitely think step 3 is to grab all those inputs, and then looking at similar products is very helpful as well. Because you can start to see what their regulatory path was, how their market success is, and that might give you some ideas of where to look for information. And then I also included here, because I think this is very important, to contact experts and consultants. And so if you're making something for the medical industry, and you're not talking to a physician to see what their need is, you might miss something really important, and then that feature or function you might miss, you might not develop, and then you get to the end and realize your consumers have a different need, and you're going back all the way to start, and you're losing tons of time and money. So I like airplanes, and I'm just enamored with the Boeing 737 MAX, so I'm going to use this for my example. So if we have a plane and we're going to fly somewhere, there's a process for this. So there's an airplane, passengers get on, they're going to talk to flight controllers, they've got a destination charted out, there's like markers along the path as they're getting there. But the plane does not sit alone, it sits in an environment. So if this plane is off the flight and you're going above a bunch of storms, you know you're going to have this bumpy, shaky ride that can be quite crazy. If you're going across a war zone, there's a lot of risk in that too. Things can go bad, you can get shot down. There's commercial airplanes that have been shot down over war zones. And if the weather looks pretty good, you've got some reasonable expectation that things should go well. So you have to begin breaking out the regulated space like this. So I'm going to bring a product to market and it's regulated. I've got my path planned out and I know how the airplane's got to function. I know who I have to communicate to, but I also have to make sure the environment is correct. And that begins to differentiate the idea of a regulatory path and a quality path. So if we look at medical device development, we've got these 5 major stages and different activities that are happening. All of these activities are building documents. These documents are going to be compiled and submitted to the FDA. And this is a process. All of this process is that airplane. So this is our regulatory path, where this has to happen if we're doing animal studies in good laboratory practices. And the FDA requires that the design phase, this phase of medical device development, be under CGMP practices, good manufacturing practices. And the reason for that is, in the 80s, 40% of the recalls that were happening were because of people failing to design it correctly. There was design issues. So designing has to happen in this space of good manufacturing practices. And then you're getting out into human trials, and you've got good clinical practices. And there's regulations and quality practices around this. Now you're marketing, you're getting your product out the door, and now you go under GMP commercial supply. And in that, there's a quality system behind that has to occur. So you have to begin thinking about a regulated product in terms of there is a regulatory strategy and a plan, and there is a quality plan. And so that gets to step 4, which is make a plan. So you know you're going to be regulated, you've classified your device, you've got your inputs, and now you're starting to lay out what is our strategy going to be to get this to market. And so for a regulatory plan, you should begin thinking about what countries are we going to go in? What claims are we going to try to pursue? And what's the impact? Are they going to classify our device differently? So if we take our diagnostic device we're developing downstairs, if we change out content to become an allergy test, we can become a class 2 device. And with the class 2 device, there's a predicate out there. We could do a 510K submission. We have a much faster path to market, just based off one switch in our device and when the change of that intended use. But we want to go after breast cancer. That makes it a little bit harder for us, but that's part of our regulatory strategy. And then you got to think out what's your product development plan and how does that overlap with your regulatory strategy. And then something that I'm a big fan of, and I don't know that many people in the startup space think about, is something called the TPP, or Technical Product Plan. And so this is the concept of saying, before I start developing it, what is it I'm trying to develop, and what do patients and physicians need? And so I emailed our CEO, or texted our CEO one day, like, hey, have you ever done a TPP for this product? And his response was, I don't know what the Trans-Pacific Pathway or something has to do with it. The other term you'll hear is like MVP in the startup world, which is your minimal viable product. So like, okay, so if we think about what we're developing, how we consider what does the clinical labs want? You know, we made it this way, but have we gotten that input to make sure that everything we're doing is done right from the beginning, to make sure that the outcome is something that's very usable for our customers? So there's actually a formal process called human factors and usability analysis. So I'm actually in the process of that. So after this meeting, I pretty much pack up and shoot over to Sanford to meet with some people there as part of that process. But you're doing your regulatory plan, and then you're doing a quality plan as well, to figure out how you're going to implement it. So a very quick overview of all of this regulatory quality stuff is it's a huge pain in the butt. And it is like climbing a mountain. My wife and I climbed a mountain in Colorado, and it was like a joke because you can look and you're like, oh, it's right there. That's where we're going. And so we're climbing, and like an hour later, nope, it's getting closer, it's right there. We're almost there. So we climbed for a little while longer. It took like 4 hours to get to the top of this stupid thing. At the end, you know, it's like each step, like,
Not very big.
it wasn't a very big one, no. If it had been much bigger, now we'd just given up and gone home. But we knew we were going the whole time, but we had to break it out into steps. Because you just can't jump to the top of it, it doesn't work. And it's the same here. There's so much stuff you have to do, and if you think about it that way, it feels like it's going to take forever and it's insurmountable. But if you make a plan and start prioritizing out what you have to do, you can then say, hey, in November, we have to get our document and record control process in place. And let's assume that will take us a few months to do and focus on that. And then the next thing we're going to do is get our document management process approved. That'll be the next plan. And then we're going to do our training plan. How are we going to train our employees? Let's make a plan for that, how we're going to document it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is actually our phase 1 of our quality plan. And we're down in October. So these have all been completed, and right now I'm working on our risk management system. And so I've been obsessed about risk for the last month. But it's way easier to manage this because I know that in October I have to do risk management. And I can find the guidance documents, the standards on risk management for medical device companies, and I can build that part of our quality system. And once that's done, I'll go on to phase 2, and I've got another checklist. And that checklist will take us 3 years to do, and it will just be a process. But if I just said, we gotta be doing GMP, we need a process in place. And we need another process, and I began thinking about all those things, it'll get overwhelming and you're not gonna get there. So you have to break it out and have a plan. Once you have the plan, and the plan should depend upon risk, you're gonna probably need more information and input on how to do it. And so the FDA is pretty good about this, especially in the device space. I think the device space is probably the best way to go through the process with the FDA, because they've got 2 sites, Device Advice and CDRH Learn. So if you go to those sites, here is a list of resources that they have, and they have all these training videos, and you can click on video, and there's a video I think on risk management, and it's about a 40-minute video, and it will walk you through that process. And then we're doing PMA, and there's a PMA video, and they walk you through. Here's how the PMA path works. Here's what to expect. Here's when you submit things. So there's plenty of ways to get information. And I wanted to throw up an example of a regulation and kind of walk you through how this goes into that plan part. So 814 is for PMAs, which is for class 3 devices. That's what we're doing. So the reading I hear is, or the visibility isn't the best, but so for your application, you have to have the name and address of the applicant on it. You then have to have a table of contents that specifies volume and page number for each thing referred to in the table. You have to have a summary in sufficient detail that the reader can gain a general understanding of the data information of the application. And that has to include indications for use, which is a general description of the disease or condition that you're going to diagnose, treat, or prevent. A device description, alternative practices, what's happening now on the market, what's your marketing history, a summary of studies, and then it just goes on. And it spells out everything your application is going to have. So for our group, we've taken this and made this into a template so that we know our final PMA is going to have our name. So it's like the easiest thing to do. I'll punch that out, check, get that done. They have a table of contents, and we can spell all of it out. Indications for use we have as a separate document in our document management system. So when it comes time to submit, I'll include that in. That will go in the table of contents. And then it goes on to say, for a PMA, you have to have 6 volumes that you submit plus 1 electronic copy. So it will spell out what you're supposed to do, which makes it pretty easy. Once you have your plan, you should check your plan. And it's easy enough to do. You can set up a pre-IND meeting with the FDA, and you can walk them through what your plan is. You can do a pre-submission or a Q-sub meeting for devices. This is for drugs. And then you should get consultants as well if you can, or someone else that's got experience to help go through your plan and make sure it's going to function. The FDA, this is a snippet from the main site for industry, and it says something along the lines like, if you're wondering if your product's going to be regulated, contact us with an exclamation mark. And there's a phone number, and there's their email address. And I've sent that email address questions before. So I was trying to figure out password security one day, like what are the requirements on password security? So I pull up the FDA email or address, plug it in my in Outlook, typed in, working for a small company, trying to figure out password security. Do you guys have any guidance documents or recommendations on password security? And a couple of days later, I got an email, and it said, here's the things that we consider. Here's a link to a guidance document. And I had information from them. It was pretty straightforward and easy. But they have hotlines. The gal that came out and presented for QUIBIT in March this year, she was someone that answers the phone. So when industry people call the FDA, she's one of the people that will answer and help guide you through what you should do next and what the steps are. So that's probably the most straightforward way to check your plan. For devices, they've got an entire guidance document how to contact them and how to set up meetings and when you should plan meetings so that they're involved with that process. And I was out at the FDA for a meeting with them, and when you sit in their office or their meeting room, they have their thing on the wall, and it's like how they want to be a partner with you. And they're pretty easy to talk with. They're people like us, and it's a good way to get feedback.
Aaron, would you find that other federal agencies are as easy to work with, like the USDA or others, as working with the FDA?
The USDA was pretty easy to work with.
I was gonna pitch it to Gary, but he's not.
Well, I think it depends on who you get too.
Sure.
So
I just like, there's some people in the crowd that maybe will use the FDA, but others. I was just wondering if there's something similar for other federal agencies, regulatory agencies, I presume.
My mind went to the Justice Department. That's why I wondered how nice they would be if they read Interact with me.
They don't bring a side to their meetings with you.
Yeah, that other people experience working with other regulatory agencies.
I'm just curious, is there like a pre-approval process that they have to go through before they start working with you, or how do they make sure that you're not gonna waste their time?
They have checklists. You can download their checklist. And then so the first thing, if you do a full submission, so I don't think they care on the front end if you waste their time. But when you get to submitting something, if you submit it, they go through a checklist to determine, it takes them 15 days to see if you've met everything, all of your package is complete. And if it passes that point, if you're like, everything is here for review, then you get a notification saying it's been given a routing number and out it goes. If they find things that are deficient, they send it back and say, here's your deficiencies. And the checklists are available so you can actually just do the checklist yourself before you submit it. But I am pretty good at asking dumb questions, and they've not told me I'm dumb yet.
Well, and they do wanna help, right? I mean, I would think that would be there.
That's their point.
Gary, the USDA, do they have something similar to process like the FDA, or DOD or other federal agencies?
I'm sure they do. All of the regulated. Actually, as he was going through the process, you're laying out the plan and you just take a template of what they tell you. That's what I always suggest to people about an SBIR. Don't just start writing. Create the template that says, here's the introduction, what's the market impact? They'll tell you what they want to see in the order they want to see it. That just helps reviewers. They don't have to look through 30 pages to find the answer to the question they want. So it's laid out in a specific order. That's to help you compose it and the reviewer actually review it and come up with and not get frustrated with this throws numbers. So.
For the FDA inspector, he did say that there are certain inspectors that take their job as police very seriously, and they will give you a false sense of security to pad their own resume and their findings, so just be careful on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. I had,
As a project manager, are you limited, or is it suggested how you conduct your project? Like the PRT, left is another one's called PMS, and another one's called walk around, whatever. Do they have any project managing techniques that they like better than others?
I have not seen anything from the FDA. I know in like computer software I like to use the agile approach. And they have a guide, there's a standard from ISO on how to use agile for FDA regulated products. So that's probably the closest example I've seen to something out there.
So they like something that would be computer generated, input to a computer that comes out with a completion date.
I don't think they necessarily care about that. Is it a validated system?
Okay.
Good question. Yeah. So there is lots of small companies use paper-based systems. And then would scan it in for submission.
Okay.
I'll do it for time.
You're right, 20 minutes.
3 o'clock here.
I have a question, because I don't want to steal the time really, but in my mind, when I think about this, I always think, oh, it's going to be so expensive. But what you're telling me, it sounds more like, look at the website, download the guidance. I mean, I can download a PDF for free. So do you feel like this is a really super expensive process to be in line with regulations? Or, I mean, what's your feeling on is it prohibitively expensive? Especially for startups? I mean,
It's really expensive.
okay.
It depends what you're doing. Yeah, it depends on what you're doing. And so I will show you in a little bit what that kind of looks like. But I worked for Novartis Animal Health. We were part of Novartis Pharma. And so you can see all their financials. Their R&D budget for Novartis Pharma was $6 billion a year.
Oh.
And they were bringing out a handful of products a year. So it's very expensive. But it depends what you're doing. So do the plan sounds obvious, but it's a long path. And you, by all means, should have some kind of project manager. Say that's what I kind of do right now. But using some kind of tool to step it apart, because there is so many pieces. So I feel like this can be a bit misleading because it looks simplistic. But when you look at, my arrows are kind of missing here. This is kind of an iterative process we were going through and redesigning. But if you look at the device, if we were somewhere in here, we'd be doing like GLP studies. If you're doing a drug, you got to figure out route, how long it stays in the body, how it's excreted, what kind of dosing regimen you're going to use, what toxicity is. You got to look at lungs, brain, and heart, and it begins to become a very large, lengthy process. If you took a drug and just took it to a company to do that work for you, I've seen quotes between 750,000 and $1 million to do just the animal-based study testing. And that is for safety, not for does my drug work and how much of my drug should I use, but just on safe proportion allowance $1 million. And doing all of this, you need a lot of staff. So right now, our company is a staff of 10. We will probably grow to 20 or 30. And as a rule of thumb in my mind, when you're budgeting, you're about $1 million a year for 10 people. So if you are kind of on these larger timelines, so for 3 to 7 years, depending on your staff, just the staff alone, you're going through money, let alone all the reagents and equipment you have to buy to make it go. So it does get spendy depending on what you do. And if you're in the drug space, I had someone tell me that they brought a drug to market in 6 years. So I have to get the rundown on this, how they did it. But right now, the average for Novartis is 14 years. And they're trying to get to 10. So it becomes a very long process and expensive. You're doing human trials as well. Human trials are very expensive.
And that pharmaceutical timeline includes the human trials that you're talking about?
Yes. So if you remember, I didn't put it after this. When we looked at class 1, class 2, and class 3, all of them said general controls. And then they said general controls plus more, depending on what the classification was. So everything's got to go through general controls. So I wanted to talk through general controls because it's kind of fun. So general controls for the FDA for a device is A, it can't be adulterated. So that's a word that FDA loves to do. If they go and audit you and give you a warning letter, they'll say your drug is found to be adulterated because this, this, and this, and this, and this. So it can't be adulterated. So examples of adulteration is your container can't be contained or composed of any poisonous or deleterious substance. So if I buy my toothbrush, which is a class 1 device, it can't be toxic. The packaging can't be. It can't, for the purposes of coloring only, contain an unsafe color additive. So that's pretty straightforward. The strength can't be differing, and it can't be in violation of good manufacturing practices. So you still have to have a quality system for how you make the toothbrush. So I was playing around, I've been doing this for a little while, and like shopping for devices. Oh, get back here. So I came across some ear candles in the store. So would these be a device? I'm pretty sure they would be. You're using them because you're trying to get some kind of therapeutic benefit for your body. So it'd be a device. So packaging can't be poisonous. I'm guessing you probably chew on it and be okay. It's not dyed wax with some kind of toxic thing you're gonna stick in your ear, so it's not having any unnecessary, unsafe, toxic dyes. So it's probably packaged right and following general controls. So then you can't misbrand your product. So that's a general control. So labels can't be false and misleading. You have to have the place and name of business. So if I look on the back here, it says distributed by Oral-B, division of Procter & Gamble, Cincinnati, Ohio, and there's your zip code, and then the phone number. So you know the place of business of the manufacturer, and then the distributor in this case has to have an accurate statement of the quantity of contents in terms of weight, measure, and numeric count. So if we look at the bottom, 1 toothbrush. Got it counted there for us.
So if you're buying private label, it's pretty easy to deduce where it was made, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got one drug at home that said made for, made by, and distributed. It's got 3 separate addresses on there. Spell it all out. And then labels must bear adequate directions for use. I have not looked at instructions for toothbrush. So here's examples. So here's an enema. It's got clear labeling on there. Tells you there's 1 bottle and it's 4.5 ounces. That would be a medical device. This is the coolest thing I found. I told my wife one for Christmas. It's like a home EKG test. So you can do an app on your phone. It's got these 2 electrodes. You stick your fingers on it, it's supposed to give you your EKG. So this would be a medical device. And here it tells you there's 1 quick start guide. There is 1 cardio mobile EKG with phone clip. And then here's their address. And it's got clear labeling. And it's probably not toxic as well. Here's a pregnancy test. This would be a diagnostic test. Tells you there's 2 tests in there. Labeling is very clear and easy to read. You can't have false or misleading labels. And labeling must bear adequate directions for use. So this is a bleed stop kit. So it shows you, rip open the package, spray it on your huge open wound. The size of this wound, like your whole arm is like slit open. And then put pressure on the wound. Here's how you put on a leg brace or an ankle brace. It's got clear directions. So this is all general controls. This is how to use the enema. I decided to like black out. It's pretty funny. I was thinking last time, like some poor person like got their job as a medical artist, and they're like, "We got a job with you. We need you to draw pictures on how to use an enema." Go ahead.
Would you recommend copywriting any of those?
I probably would. And technically, copyrights are inherent when you do them. But I'm sure companies do as well. Oh, let's see, you have to have a brief statement of its intended use and relevant warnings, precautions, and side effects. And so this is a portable breathalyzer you can get, so if you want to figure out how intoxicated you are. And it says right on here, screens for the presence of alcohol in human breath used in the diagnosis of alcohol intoxication. So it's a device, it's got an intended use statement right on the packaging. They do not have their quantity on here. So I'm like tempted to like send them an email and be like, by the way, your package doesn't meet general controls if you don't have quantity. But I don't know if I'm that sorry. And then lastly, this is on the back of some condoms, so it's this really nice, elaborate warning letter. So this is meeting general controls because there's a risk if it fails. You can get HIV, etc., and they can be lethal. What are we doing for time?
Yeah.
Huh?
8 minutes.
8 minutes. Okay. So this is the painting code research. I joke around that this is how it works. You got someone doing it, and we all sit around and watch. But the reason I think it's worth, and so the question is it worth it? And I'll make the case that it is. So this is back in the 30s. You've probably heard this story before at some point, where there's a company, they make sulfanilamide, and this one sales rep says, hey, they want something liquid. So this chemist, Harold Watkins, finds that you can dissolve it in diethylene glycol. And so dissolves it, goes in readily. They find out that it tastes pretty good. So they looked at appearance and fragrance and found it was satisfactory, shipped them out. They did 633 of them. And then in September, October, so this product development time, we got June to September, they're shipping product from an idea to implementing the idea, getting outdoors, super fast. Great for innovation. So out it goes and began killing people, and it killed 100 people. The FDA at that point they had a group called the Poison Squad and different iterations of what ended up becoming the FDA. That people had to go out and track every single vial down because they didn't want to kill people off if they were consuming this. And so this sulfanilamide thing led to the FDA. So this is a physician that used this drug. This is an article or what he had said. I've been familiar with death, but to realize that 6 human beings, all of my patients, one my best friend, are dead because they took the medicine I prescribed for them innocently, made him say there's hours when death would have been a welcome relief from this agony. So this physician is using a drug given to him by a company, trusting the company, and is killing people. He had nothing he was doing wrong from that standpoint. Had they done an animal study on it, they would have killed animals and seen this is toxic. They didn't do animal studies because there was no requirement for it. They didn't have to mess around with animal studies, they could just go. So animal studies would have done it. If they had done a review of literature, they would have seen it's toxic, causes kidney failure. But nobody had to review literature, they could go quick. There was no requirements for these things, so they didn't. The guy who owns the company says, my chemist and I deeply regret the fatal results, but there was no error in the manufacturing of the product. We did it right, not our problem. We've been supplying a legitimate professional demand and not once could have foreseen the overlooked results or the unlooked results. I don't feel there was any responsibility on our part. This is like a typical CEO statement. Not our fault, we did everything right, we weren't regulated. The chemist committed suicide over the deal. So this guy was doing his job. He was a professional doing experiments, and there was no regulations or guidance for how to operate. And because it wasn't there, it was obviously made him take his own life as the results. And the physician that's innocently using this product, trusting the manufacturer, he's got to trust them, he ends up killing his best friend off in the process. So when I think about the FDA, like, I don't want to be the company that sends out a product to kill somebody. And I don't want to give physicians a false sense of security because I didn't do all the steps to make sure we gave the highest level of product quality we could. On a more light note, AEDs. So these are showing up all around in public places. You go to airports, you see them in malls. I worked at a casino when we had AEDs there. And there was a number of people that went into cardiac arrest while I worked there, and we had a good chunk of our staff members that were trained as first responders. We would get AEDs on them, and within cardiac arrest being shocked, we had a window of like a minute to 2 minutes. We had patients that were in cardiac arrest that were talking when the ambulance arrived to pick them up. Had we not had an AED, most of them would have died. So we were able, because of somebody going through that whole process to get medical devices out there and make defibrillators, the Zola in this case, because they went through that process, we were able to take people that would have been completely dead and have them talking when the ambulance arrives. So they set themselves on a cot, went to the hospital, and went and saw a cardiologist later on, and were able to live because of it. So it is a huge pain in the butt and a lot of work and a lot of money, but the end result is certainly improving our lives and having it worthwhile.
We have another meeting coming in at 9 o'clock.
Yep, all right, I should probably get splitting.
Thank you all for coming. Aaron will be here, I think, can we just go out there and.
Yeah, what time is it?
We have 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah, 3 minutes.
So I'm gonna give you time to wrap up, but, quickly, if he gets done, we'll head on out to the, common area and we can further our conversation, so.
Sounds good. Hey, Brianna. There you go.
Good work. Oh, are you? That's awesome. I love it.
I was gonna say you're all invited to join us out here when you're done. We're doing startup horror stories this morning.
Absolutely.
Because I have a mouthful of donut ball, but we're just gonna share stories about our struggles as entrepreneurs, and I think it's gonna be pretty good. There's some people dressed up out here too that you might want to see, so please join us.
Absolutely. Well, unless there are any questions, I just want to say thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. This was very informative.
Sorry, I thought they were coming in this room, so.
Yeah.
Oh, I kind of thought they were too.
But I also want to say there's really great resources here, so with the SBA, they will help with business development planning, anything like that. Use them. Go Ed, who just left, but they have some early stage funding, proof of concept funding that we can help make some connections that way. So please use all of the folks here in this room as you develop your companies. Don't be afraid to reach out to us. That's why we're here. So, does anyone have any questions for Aaron?
Thanks, man.
That was pretty complete.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, thank you so very much. I think this is
And well
helpful.
justified.
Yeah.
That round.